Hiya, folks. What we're going to look at today is the rise of Airbnb and how the external environment has affected it since it started. So we're going to do two sets of pestle, one for 2007, 2008 when it first started, and one for 2020 and now, so 2021, and how the external environment has changed. So I'll get started. So back in 2007, you've got two friends, Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, who essentially live in San Francisco and are struggling to pay their rent. They're design students, and rather than hiring out their spare room, the story goes, they decided to start renting out some air mattresses for people to use in their flat. And they do quite well because there's a design exhibition going on and they treat the guests really well. And that's how the idea of Airbnb starts. So if we look at the environment in 2007, politically, Airbnb has been one of the fastest growing hotel chains without owning a single room. And so the political landscape wasn't prepared for that. And that meant that a lot of people were able to earn that extra income without necessarily having to pay a lot of taxes because the political system wasn't set up for short-term hiring of spare bedrooms, etc. And that's changed over time. Economically, Airbnb started in 2007, 2008, and 2008 is when we experienced the economic crash or the recession. So Airbnb became really popular because it gave people an extra income at a time when they really needed it and they had a lot of insecurity around the income that their jobs would bring in. People didn't know if they were going to be laid off, etc. Okay. And it was also during a time of the sharing economy. So people were used to hiring out their cars, etc. And so hiring out your spare room was just another thing. And companies were seen as quite positively, really. Technological companies were seen as quite positive. Socially, people wanted a change in what they were expecting from holidays. So prior to that, people wanted very standard holidays. They wanted to be able to get a hotel room anywhere in the world and feel like it was a hotel room back in their own country. But people wanted more of an authentic experience at the time when Airbnb was rising. And so what happened was that it allowed people to go and experience local areas with the hosts, and hosts would leave tips about local restaurants they could go to. And so it filled that social need. And however, over time, that social need changed in that people didn't want to share bathrooms, etc., or hire out a room. They wanted a whole place. And that's where we saw the rise of large kind of investors investing in houses and flats in cities and then hiring them out and making a lot of money through Airbnb. Now, it's important to note here that that's essentially, according to the owners, not what Airbnb's aim was. It was for the kind of everyday Joe Blog to just be able to hire out and earn an extra income from his spare room so that he could pay for, I don't know, his kids' tuition fees or whatever it may be. Technologically, the owners were design graduates, so they knew how to put together a decent website. And it also took away the effort of individual hosts, so people who had spare rooms, etc., looking for customers, dealing with bookings, dealing with cancellations, etc. Airbnb did all of that. Legally, Airbnb has kind of set itself up where it doesn't really have a lot of legal implications or obligations, towards the host. So it doesn't own any of the property, and so it doesn't have a lot of legal obligations there. Environmentally, we'll see how socially and environmentally it has had a big impact over time. But at that time, essentially, there were these spare rooms and it was allowing them to be used to full capacity and allowing households to make an extra income through that. In terms of challenges that they faced when they first started out in 2007 and their competition, well, there were other sites. I just don't think they were as slick as Airbnb. And the standard was really hotels. So it really did help provide an alternative. The key challenge for the owners was convincing people to host people and also be on their website. As you can imagine, if you set up a new website and nobody's on it, it can be quite daunting for people to then, kind of put their house up on rent through it. So those were the kind of external factors that really affected Airbnb. There weren't any huge challenges. It was just getting people used to the idea. And socially, people were leaning towards renting homes and wanting to go in and be greeted by hosts, etc. and having a more authentic experience on holiday. However, things have changed quite a lot since then. And in 2020, 2021, we're seeing a massive change in the external environment politically. Okay. Governments and local authorities are starting to really crack down on people that are skirting the rules around paying taxes through this additional income. There's new regulations in place that limit the number of nights that you can have short-term rental properties online and available for. So in London, that's 90 nights per year. And the reason for that is because a lot of people have bought Airbnb properties in these cities, which has driven the prices of property really high and made it really difficult for locals to be able to own property. And that's a problem that the local councils are having to deal with, and it's causing a lot of homelessness. And New York is a classic example of that. Okay. In terms of economic, locals really feel like the homeowners aren't participating towards their community and their local economy. Often they're not local owners. And so it's having an economic impact where these tourists are really disrupting local economies and local communities. Okay. Socially, it's having a massive impact on local communities as well. So Airbnb is getting a lot of flack in terms of driving local people out of the city. So they have to live further and further away because they can't afford properties in the city centre. Edinburgh is a classic example of that. And also, people are claiming that tourists are changing the characteristics of these neighborhoods. And so these tight neighborhoods where people used to live for generation to generation now being broken up. Okay. Another element to remember in 2020, August 2020, is when Airbnb filed its IPO to be able to sell its shares on the stock market. And at the same time, it cut 2,000 employees' jobs. So that's 25% of its workforce. So just from a kind of public relations point of view, it didn't really time that well. And people started seeing Airbnb as less like, the kind of local B&B host that you kind of hire a room or a flat from, to this kind of Goliath that is abusing its power. Technologically, it has had some issues from fraudulent listings, and people scamming customers. So putting houses that they don't really own and making them available, but it's not been a huge issue. However, there has been a backlash because every bad experience now, because of social media, is available online for everybody to view. So there is a website called AirBNB Hell where you can see trashed homes and where people have kind of hired the apartment, but then done more damage than they ever would have paid for it. Okay. And like I said, the legal obligations that Airbnb has towards its hosts are really minimal. So it's not able to provide a lot of protection in terms of that. Environmentally, people are arguing that Airbnb has a massive carbon footprint because, like I said, it's bringing huge tourists to small little villages in some cases that aren't built for tourism. And so it has a big impact environmentally on those local areas. And now it's quite interesting, during COVID, big kind of legal factors have taken place. So obviously COVID has meant lockdown for a lot of areas. And although Airbnb allows for people to be in small bubbles, because transport has been limited, we can see the impact of that as being quite negative on Airbnb, and it published massive losses in 2019. Whether that will make any impact on its share price is yet to be seen, because I imagine a lot of people will think that it will just pick back up. The other element of kind of legal to be mindful of in 2020, 2021 is Airbnb changed its cancellation policy. So hosts have been quite free to set their own cancellation policies on Airbnb. So some will say you can cancel up to 24 hours before a holiday. Others will ask you for a couple of weeks. But Airbnb asked for all hosts to refund customers to keep its customers happy. And that obviously did a lot of people out of pocket. And some people who relied solely on Airbnb for their income went bust. Okay. And that caused a lot of animosity between the hosts. So people who kind of rent out their property on Airbnb and Airbnb. And Airbnb did have to make a public apology to those hosts in the way that it went about doing that, and how it just ordered that they should issue a refund. If you look, they've reevaluated their refund policy now, so some of the risk is placed on the customer. Okay. It's also struggled to control unauthorized parties at its sites because, like I said, it doesn't legally own any of the properties, so it has very little control. So there have been some legal elements that have caused a problem for Airbnb. Some of the challenges that it's faced from competition: the Marriott chain of hotels is looking at a home rental service, so that'll be really interesting to see. And I believe that the Hilton are also looking at doing something similar. There is a rival rental site that is supposed to be up and running, which is called AirBNB, and they promise a lot more transparency. They are proving to be more like what Airbnb started out wanting to be, which was for the small guy that just wanted to hire out a room, etc. And so some people that feel that sustainability and preserving communities is really important may be more likely to use Airbnb than Airbnb. Okay. And the expectations around the platform have risen as people's expectations have grown. Hosts talk about having to meet really weird requirements, like having gadgets in the house and a particular blender, etc. Otherwise, customers will leave a bad review. And again, hosts don't feel very protected by Airbnb, so that might cause a bit of a backlash. The public perception of hotels during COVID has changed as well. So some people would rather go to a hotel where they think standards of cleaning will be higher than an individual who is just renting out their apartment. So whether people will prefer to go to hotels in the near future or go back to Airbnb remains to be seen. So what you've got there in a nutshell in about 11-12 minutes is Pestle back in 2007. So Pestle back in 2007 when Airbnb started and how it really allowed Airbnb to grow, and Pestle now and how it's causing some problems for Airbnb as it tries to go public and raise more funds.